On August 14, 2026, in Jakarta, President Prabowo Subianto does not announce a new mine. He announces a new door. Every strategic commodity Indonesia sells to the world is slated to pass through one state-controlled entity. Officials name it Danantara Sumberdaya Indonesia, DSI. One desk, one pair of eyes on every shipment ticket, one compulsory path between the islands and the buyers who have treated Indonesian cargo as a private market. It sounds like paperwork. It is a rewrite of who is allowed to price a nation. Indonesia is not empty ground with a flag on it. It is a chain of islands that can darken a skyline with steam coal, grease kitchens with crude palm oil, and feed the battery age with nickel. Conveyors still run, harbors still fill, tonnage still leaves under cranes you can photograph from a phone. And still, for a generation, the foreign exchange that should have arrived with those ships has come in light. The contradiction is almost insulting. You can weigh ore, you can count containers of oil. You cannot, from the dock, see the second number a related company writes in another jurisdiction.
That second number is where a country becomes poorer without a single sack going missing. Prabowo frames the move as modernization and control of strategic exports. Critics already hear an older Indonesian word under the branding: monopoly. The government says visibility. Offshore traders hear the death of a margin they have treated like weather. This is not a story about pirates boarding a freighter. It is a story about invoices, about a resource giant that decided the wound was never in the harbor. It was in the price. If the gate is built as designed, no strategic cargo leaves except through the state. If the gate fails, Jakarta will have stacked a choke point on top of every old temptation choke points breed. Either way, the loose era of cheap, easily flipped Indonesian commodities is being argued in public on a Thursday in August. The question the announcement will not say out loud is simple. How does a warehouse of the earth bleed like a cut that never shows on the ship?
Most people still imagine a commodity sale as a ship meeting a world price. The price is on a screen, the cargo is in the hold. The dollars follow the hull. That picture is the blind spot. What Indonesian officials and investigators have described since the early 1990s is quieter. A mine or a mill inside the Republic sells to an affiliate parked offshore. The first invoice is low. Customs sees the low number. Royalties, taxes, and reported export proceeds attach themselves to that low number. Then the same cargo, or the paper claim on that cargo, is resold from the offshore book at something much closer to the real market. The spread does not fall into a river. It sits in a ledger designed to be somewhere else. Under-invoicing is the ugly twin of that move. The declared value at the Indonesian gate is shaved. Volume can be honest, while value is not. Transfer pricing is the family version. Two companies under one roof, or one roof with a convenient cousin, setting a price that would never survive two strangers in a room. None of this requires a stolen barge. It requires a signature and a jurisdiction that does not ask the second question.
From 1991 forward, the state's running estimate of what that pattern drained from coal, palm oil, and nickel is $908 billion. Not a bad quarter. A generation's missing difference between what left the islands and what the paperwork admitted. The figure is an official accusation of scale, not a single audited suitcase found in an airport. Treat it as the government treats it, a bill it believes the old trading architecture wrote against the Republic. The geography made the trick easy to hide in plain sight. Kalimantan's thermal coal moved in ugly, necessary rivers of black. Sumatra and Kalimantan's palm estates produced an oil the world put in biscuits, soap, and biodiesel. Later, Sulawesi and Halmahera turned laterite into the metal that battery chemists cannot ignore. 3 different landscapes, 3 different industrial tribes, one shared temptation. The first sale is the taxable sale, so make the first sale look poorer than the second. After the late 1990s crash, Indonesia spent years opening what the old order had clenched. Liberalization did not end extraction, it changed the extractor. The palace monopoly of an earlier era gave way to a pricing chain. Multinational trading houses and their local counterparts did not need a presidential decree to sit between the pit and the foreign smelter.
They needed a contract, a related party, and a customs form that recorded a number the pit would never have accepted from a stranger. Foreign exchange is the part ordinary maps never draw. A ship can leave Balikpapan full and still leave Bank Indonesia hungry if the declared value is a fiction. Reserves do not grow on tonnage. They grow on the dollars that clear. A nation can post heroic export volumes and still feel poor in hard currency because the heroic number was never the number on the invoice that mattered. That is the world most coverage of commodity giants misses. The public sees a boom when Chinese stainless mills are hungry or when Europe needs coal after a shock. The public does not see the quiet discount written between affiliates before the boom even reaches the tax office. For 30 years, the discount was not a glitch. It was a business model.
By the time Jakarta started talking about a single compulsory gate, the argument was no longer whether leakage existed as a theory. The argument was whether a state that once ran monopolies as patronage could now run visibility as policy without putting the old hand back on the tap. The missing money is the reason the new door exists. The missing money is also the reason every trader in Singapore, Geneva, and Shanghai already knows what the door is meant to kill. Follow the factions, not a childhood. Prabowo Subianto wants foreign exchange he can count, a political story of sovereignty, and a state that no longer has to take a trader's word for what Indonesian dirt is worth. He inherits a republic that already spent a decade tightening its fist around minerals. He does not need to invent resource nationalism. He needs to decide whether nationalism stops at the mine gate or continues onto the bill of lading. MIND is the precedent sitting in the room. The state mining holding was built to pull scattered government miners into one group, one balance sheet, one set of instructions. Consolidation was sold as professionalism, fewer leaking subsidiaries, more bargaining power, a national champion that could sit across from Beijing and London without looking like a collection of lonely pits. Once you accept that logic underground, the next obsession is obvious. Why own the ore and still let someone else own the first honest price? DSI is that obsession given a name. It is not another miner. It is designed as the compulsory merchant, the desk that stands between strategic cargo and the world. The incentive is total sight, volume, price.
Destination. The dollars that used to fog out through related party sales would, in theory, have to pass a single Indonesian eye. Across the table sit the houses that lived on fog. A trading book makes money when two prices exist for one cargo, and only one of those prices is visible to the sovereign. Strip the second price, and you do not merely tax the trader, you fire the trader's reason for being in the middle. Their motive is not cartoon villainy. It is the oldest commodity instinct on Earth. Buy the opacity, sell the clarity, keep the spread. Between those poles stand exporters who are Indonesian on paper and global in their treasuries. Ministry staff who will be asked to price cargo they used to only stamp. And buyers in China, India, Japan, and Europe who liked the old chaos because chaos was cheap. Channel News Asia's reporting on the move is already carrying the expert worry in plain language. Revenues might rise, and so might the state's hand. The life or death decision is not whether Indonesia has been underpaid. The decision is what kind of animal Jakarta is willing to become to stop it. A transparent gate can recapture proceeds.
A political gate can recapture proceeds and then allocate them as favors. Prabowo's camp will call that sovereignty. Traders will call it the return of a toll. Both can be true in the same week. In 2020, Indonesia already chose the harder road on nickel. It banned raw ore exports to force smelters onto its own soil. That was a production decision. This new desk is a pricing decision. One told the world it could not have the rock uncooked. The other tells the world it cannot have the rock unwatched. Ambition and constraint meet there. Ambition wants every dollar. Constraint is the civil service, the corruption risk, and the simple fact that a state desk can be slower than a trader who answers only to a profit and loss sheet.
Here is the mechanism, without romance. A one-gate system does not need to seize a vessel at gunpoint. It needs a rule. No strategic export is valid unless the sale runs through the state entity. The contract, the volume, the price, the counterparty, the currency, the date the dollars are supposed to land, all of it has to cross one Indonesian book.
Offshore traders can still exist downstream. They just lose the privilege of being the first price. The first price becomes a public fact, or at least a state fact, which is the nearest thing Jakarta can force. Arbitrage dies in a specific way. The old spread lived in the dark between an affiliate sale at 11 and a market sale at 16. If the state is the only legal seller at the water's edge, that $11 fiction has nowhere to stand. You cannot under-invoice the Republic if the Republic is the invoice. You cannot park the real margin in a cousin's trading shop if the cousin is no longer allowed to be the exporter of record. Visibility is the weapon, not a slogan.
Volume that used to be scattered across hundreds of private declarations becomes a single flow. The finance ministry can reconcile against ships, against production, against what Chinese and Indian customs say they received. Mismatches that once looked like fog start to look like evidence. That is why the architecture terrifies people who never minded a little fog. The 2020 nickel ore ban was a rehearsal in force, not in accounting. Jakarta accepted smashed short-term export receipts in exchange for smelters, jobs, and a later, higher-value product. Companies screamed. Then many of them built. The lesson the palace took was not that the world would thank Indonesia. The lesson was that the world would adapt if the rock was valuable enough. OneGate applies that lesson to paper. If buyers needed the metal then, they need the coal, the oil, and the nickel now. Adaptation, in this theory, is their problem. Watch the present tense of the fight, because the announcement is not a completed empire. It is a design colliding with a market that already knows how to bleed around designs. Exporters ask who sets the daily price. If DSI posts a number above the unofficial market, cargo sits.
If it posts below, the state has just done to itself what it accused the traders of doing. Ministry staff who have never run a trading book are about to discover that a wrong price for 1 week of thermal coal is not an academic error. It is a jammed anchorage and a furious power utility in another country. Buyers ask whether they are now negotiating with a commercial counterparty or with a flag. A flag can cancel a cargo for politics. A flag can favor a friend. A flag can also refuse the old discount. Supply chain managers who built Indonesia into their models as a cheap, plural, slightly chaotic source now have to model a single desk with a presidential shadow behind it. Reporting out of the crackdown already uses a colder word than triumph: confusion. Licenses, transition rules, which commodities count as strategic, who is still allowed to talk to an old trading house, how existing contracts convert. The machine is being described before the gears have proven they mesh. Confusion is not a sideshow. Confusion is how a choke point announces itself to people who have to move real tons next month. Idealism says the gate is a customs X-ray for a country's bloodstream.
Reality says X-rays can be sold. The same concentration that kills transfer pricing can mint a new patronage market. Access to the desk, speed through the desk, a friendly interpretation of quality, a quiet exception for a connected mill. Suharto-era monopolies are the ghost at this feast, even when the branding says modern sovereign wealth and national champions. The ghost does not have to be accurate to be useful. It only has to be plausible enough that investors price it in. Dominoes start in other capitals, not in speeches. If a OneGate actually lifts realized export prices, every finance minister sitting on copper, lithium, bauxite, or cocoa will take notes. Resource-rich states have spent years watching Indonesia force downstream nickel plants and survive. A pricing gate is a more contagious idea than a smelter because it does not require $1 billion of Chinese furnace. It requires a law and the nerve to make foreign traders apply for a ticket. Then the wound opens, and it does not close neatly. A successful gate can still shrink liquidity. Traders provided something besides leakage.
They provided timing, blending, credit, and a willingness to take a cargo nobody wanted this week. Kill their margin, and you may kill their willingness to stand in the rain. Indonesia could recapture proceeds and still find itself with fewer ships willing to wait, fewer buyers willing to sign long, and a state merchant learning expensively what a default looks like when the default is political. An unsuccessful gate is uglier. Private invoices migrate into barter, quality games, and mislabeled cargo. The state sees a clean book and a dirty sea. Experts who already worry about a stronger state hand will say the hand got stronger and the dollars still left. Nationalists will say the answer is more hand. Global supply chains do not need a completed monopoly to start rewriting risk memos. They need the possibility that the world's great pantry of coal, palm, and nickel now answers to one political desk. Cheap, easily arbitraged Indonesian commodities were not a law of nature. They were a regulatory weather system. The weather is changing in public, and nobody standing in it gets to pretend they cannot feel the wind. Leave it there, unresolved.
The gate is a design for capturing foreign exchange. It is also a design for concentrating power. Those two facts do not cancel. They travel together, in the same ship, under the same new stamp. There is a larger principle under the oar, and it does not belong only to one republic. For a long time, the global commodity trade ran on a polite fiction. The rock is national, the price is private. Countries could plant flags on pits, publish patriotic production statistics, even ban a raw export, and still leave the first honest number to a man with two letterheads. The fiction was efficient. It kept cargo moving. It also trained a generation of treasuries to confuse tonnage with wealth. What is being tested now is whether a resource state can pull the price back inside the border without turning the border into a shop for favors. That is not automatically a morality play. It is an institutional bet. Visibility can be a public good. Concentration can be a private feast. The same stamp can serve both, depending on who holds the ink after the cameras leave. Other producers are watching because the old bargain is aging everywhere. Downstream industrial powers want cheap inputs and predictable contracts. Upstream nations want the foreign exchange those inputs imply. In the gap between those wants, traders built a civilization of spreads. When that civilization is threatened, supply chains do not write essays. They reroute, they hoard, they add a political premium to every ton that used to be treated like weather. Imagine, not as a fact on the water today, but as the shape this policy is aiming at, a future in which an Indonesian coal parcel, a tank of palm, a nickel contract, all carry a single state price, the way a passport carries a single seal. The romance of that image is control. The aftertaste is simpler. Control is heavy. It has to be staffed, audited, restrained, or it becomes the thing it was built to replace. The era of easily flipped cargo does not end because someone gave a speech. It ends, if it ends, when the second invoice has nowhere left to hide. Paper was always the real mine. The islands only supplied the alibi. So the last picture is not a freighter. It is a form. Two columns. What left? What was declared. For 30 years, those columns refused to look at each other. A state has now said they will. When a country finally forces them to match, who does it trust to hold the pen?